Michael Rodriguez woke up as the sun came through the broken windows of the old building. His back hurt from sleeping on the hard concrete floor. He had used a piece of cardboard as a bed and his old army jacket as a blanket. The same jacket that once made him proud now smelled like the streets. He sat up slowly and looked around the empty room. Beer bottles and trash covered the floor. Other homeless people had stayed here before him, but now he was alone. Michael rubbed his face with dirty hands and tried to remember what day it was. Tuesday, he thought, or maybe Wednesday. The days all felt the same now. Once Michael had been a different man. He was Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez of the United States Army. He wore a clean uniform every day. His boots were always shiny. His hair was cut short and neat. Other soldiers looked up to him. He was a leader, a hero, a man who mattered. That was before Afghanistan changed everything. Michael stood up and walked to the broken window. Outside, he could see the busy streets of Miami. Cars rushed by. People walked fast, going to their jobs. They all had somewhere to be, something important to do. Michael had nowhere to go and nothing to do. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small metal box. Inside were his military medals, a Purple Heart for being wounded in battle, a Bronze Star for being brave, a Combat Infantry badge for fighting on the front lines. The medals were still shiny, but they felt heavy in his hands now. They reminded him of who he used to be. Michael had joined the Army when he was 18 years old. He wanted to serve his country and make his family proud. His mother cried when he left for basic training, but she was proud too. She hung his picture in uniform on the living room wall for everyone to see. The Army made Michael strong. He learned to be a soldier, then a leader. When his country needed him, he went to Afghanistan 3 times. He led other young men into dangerous places. He made hard choices. He saved lives. He watched friends die. In Afghanistan, Michael was good at his job. Too good, maybe. He could stay calm when bombs went off. He could think clearly when bullets flew past his head. He could make quick decisions that kept his men alive. The other soldiers trusted him completely. But Afghanistan was a hard place. The desert was hot during the day and cold at night. The enemy could be anywhere. They hid bombs in the road. They shot at soldiers from buildings and hills. Every day could be your last day. Michael saw terrible things in Afghanistan. He saw friends get killed by roadside bombs. He saw children caught in the middle of fighting. He had to shoot people who were trying to kill him and his men. At night, he would lie in his bed and think about home. He would count the days until he could go back to America. When Michael finally came home after his 3rd tour, everything felt different. The colors seemed too bright. The sounds were too loud. When a car backfired, he would jump and look for cover. When he heard a helicopter, his heart would race. He could not sleep through the night without having bad dreams. His wife, Maria, tried to understand. She would hold him when he woke up screaming. She would tell him everything was okay, that he was safe now. But Michael did not feel safe. He felt like danger was everywhere, even in his own home. Michael tried to go back to his old job at the car repair shop. His boss was happy to have him back, but Michael could not focus on fixing cars. His hands would shake when he heard loud noises. He would get angry over small problems. After a few months, his boss had to let him go. The Army doctors said Michael had something called PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. They said it was normal for soldiers who had seen combat. They gave him pills and told him to talk to a counselor. But the pills made him feel sleepy and strange. The counselor was a young woman who had never been to war. She did not understand what Michael had been through. Without a job, Michael could not pay his bills. Maria worked as a nurse, but her pay was not enough for both of them. They started fighting about money. They fought about Michael's drinking. They fought about his anger. Maria would cry and ask Michael to get help. Michael would promise to try. But he did not know how. The drinking made things worse, but it also made the pain go away for a while. When Michael drank, he could forget about Afghanistan. He could forget about the friends he lost. He could forget about the people he killed, but when he sobered up, everything came back twice as bad. One day, Maria packed her bags and left. She said she still loved Michael, but she could not watch him destroy himself anymore. She said maybe if he got better, they could try again. But Michael knew she was not coming back. He had lost the most important thing in his life. After Maria left, Michael lost the house. He had no job and no way to pay the mortgage. The bank took everything. Michael packed his clothes and medals into a bag and left. He had nowhere to go. At first, Michael stayed in cheap motels. When his money ran out, he slept in his car. When the car was taken away, he slept in parks, then under bridges, then in abandoned buildings like this one. The streets were hard. Homeless people sometimes fought over food or sleeping spots. The police would move them along when business owners complained. Social workers would come around sometimes, but they had too many people to help and not enough resources. Michael learned to survive on the streets. He knew where to find free food. He knew which buildings were safe to sleep in. He knew how to stay invisible when the police came by. But surviving was not living. It was just existing from one day to the next. Now, as Michael looked out the broken window at the busy street, he felt completely alone. The world had moved on without him. The war in Afghanistan was mostly forgotten. New soldiers were fighting in new places. Nobody remembered Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez anymore. Michael put his medals back in the box and closed it. He picked up his few things and put them in his bag. He had to leave this building before the police came. There was a court date today. He had been arrested last week for sleeping in the wrong place. Trespassing, they called it. As if a war hero could trespass in his own country. Michael walked out of the building and into the bright Miami morning. He had to be at the courthouse by 9 o'clock. The judge would probably give him some jail time or community service. Then he would be back on the streets again, looking for another place to sleep. As he walked toward downtown, Michael thought about the man he used to be. That man seemed like a stranger now. That man had hope and purpose. That man believed he mattered. This man, walking to court in dirty clothes, was just trying to make it through another day. The courthouse was big and white, with tall columns that made it look important. Michael climbed the steps slowly, his bag heavy on his shoulder. He did not know that inside that building, his life was about to change forever. Judge Patricia Williams arrived at the courthouse at 7 in the morning, 2 hours before her first case. This was her routine for the past 20 years. She liked the quiet time to review files and prepare for the day ahead. At 58 years old, she had seen almost everything in her courtroom. Patricia parked her car in the judge's parking area and walked through the back entrance of the building. She nodded to the security guards who knew her well. "Good morning, Judge Williams," they said. She smiled and wished them a good day, too. Her office was on the 3rd floor, down a long hallway lined with pictures of past judges. Patricia's own picture would join them someday when she retired, but that day was still years away. She loved her job too much to think about stopping. Patricia hung up her coat and sat at her desk. The morning sun came through her window, lighting up the law books that filled her shelves. She had studied those books in law school, learned from them as a young lawyer, and still referred to them as a judge. The law was her life's work. Her assistant, Mrs. Chen, knocked on the door and came in with a cup of coffee. "Good morning, Your Honor. Here's your schedule for today." She placed a folder on Patricia's desk and left quietly. Patricia opened the folder and looked at the list of cases. Traffic violations, drug possession, theft, domestic violence, trespassing. The usual mix of human problems that came before her. Court every day. She had learned long ago not to get too emotional about the cases. She had to be fair and follow the law, no matter what she felt personally. But Patricia had not always been a judge. Before law school, before her career in the courtroom, she had served her country in a different way. She was Lieutenant Patricia, Williams, United States Army, Judge Advocate General's Corps, a military lawyer. That was 25 years ago when she was young and full of energy. The Army had sent her to different bases around the world. She handled court-martial cases, gave legal advice to commanders, and helped soldiers with their problems. It was good training for her later career as a civilian judge. Her most memorable assignment was in Afghanistan. She was there for 1 year during some of the heaviest fighting. As a JAG officer, she was not on the front lines, but she was close enough to hear the guns and see the helicopters bringing in wounded soldiers. Patricia's job in Afghanistan was to handle legal cases involving military personnel. Sometimes soldiers got in trouble for fighting with each other. Sometimes they disobeyed orders. Sometimes worse things happened, and she had to prosecute serious crimes. One case still stayed in her memory after all these years. A young sergeant had been accused of leaving his post during a firefight. Leaving your position during battle was a serious crime in the military. It could mean years in prison and a dishonorable discharge. But when Patricia investigated the case, she learned the real story. The sergeant had not run away from the fight. He had left his position to save 3 wounded soldiers who were trapped under enemy fire. He had carried them to safety one by one, risking his own life each time. The sergeant's name was Michael Rodriguez. He was 24 years old, with dark hair and serious brown eyes. When he testified in the court-martial, he spoke quietly and simply about what he had done. He did not try to make himself sound like a hero. He just told the truth. "I heard. My buddies calling for help," he had said. "I could not leave them there to die, so I went to get them." Other soldiers testified about Sergeant Rodriguez's bravery that day. They said he had saved those 3 men's lives. They said he was the kind of leader they would follow anywhere. The charges against him were dropped, and he later received the Bronze Star for his actions. Patricia remembered thinking that Michael Rodriguez was exactly the kind of soldier America needed. Brave, loyal, and willing to risk everything for his fellow soldiers. She hoped he would have a long and successful military career. After her year in Afghanistan, Patricia came back to the United States and left the Army. She went to law school, became a prosecutor, and then a judge. The years passed quickly. Afghanistan became a memory, though not one she could ever completely forget. Patricia had seen many veterans come through her courtroom over the years. Some had adjusted well to civilian life. Others struggled with injuries, both physical and mental. She always tried to be understanding with veterans, knowing what they had sacrificed for their country. Now, sitting in her office, Patricia looked through the morning's cases. One caught her attention: Michael Rodriguez, charged with trespassing and disturbing the peace. The file said he was a homeless veteran, unemployed, with a history of PTSD. Patricia frowned. Rodriguez was not an uncommon name, especially in Miami, but something about it felt familiar. She opened the file and read more carefully. Michael Anthony Rodriguez, age 49, former Staff Sergeant, United States Army, 3rd Infantry Division. Her heart began to beat faster. The age was about right. The rank was right. The unit sounded familiar. Patricia reached for her computer and searched for more information about this Michael Rodriguez. What she found made her stomach sink. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Decorated. For valor, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Combat Infantry Badge. Divorced, unemployed, homeless for 3 years. Arrested multiple times for minor offenses. Patricia sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. Could this be the same Michael Rodriguez she had known in Afghanistan? The brave young sergeant who had risked his life to save his fellow soldiers. She tried to remember more details from that court-martial 25 years ago. The dates matched. The unit was the same. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became. This was the same man. But what had happened to him? How had a decorated war hero ended up homeless and facing charges in her courtroom? Patricia felt a deep sadness as she thought about all the ways war could damage a person, even years after the fighting ended. Patricia had seen this story before. Good soldiers who came home changed by what they had experienced. Men and women who had been strong and confident in the military, but who could not find their place in civilian society. Some were lucky and got the help they needed. Others fell through the cracks. She thought about her own transition from military to civilian life. She had been fortunate. She had family support, education benefits, and a clear career path. Not every veteran was so lucky. Patricia looked at her watch. It was almost 9 o'clock. Time to put on her robe and go to the courtroom. The morning's cases were waiting, including the case of Michael Rodriguez. She wondered if he would remember her. Probably not. She had been just one of many officers he had encountered during his military service. She was older now, with gray hair and lines on her face. He might not recognize Lieutenant Williams in Judge Williams, but she would recognize him. Even if he looked different, even if life had been hard on him, she would know those serious brown eyes. She would remember the young sergeant who had risked everything to save his friends. Patricia stood up and put on her black judge's robe. She looked at herself in the mirror on her office door. For 20 years, she had tried to be fair and impartial to every person who came before her court. Today would be different. Today she would see someone she had once known, someone who had served his country with honor. She picked up the case files and walked toward the courtroom. Her bailiff and court reporter were already there, setting up for the morning session. The courtroom was filling with people. Defendants, lawyers, family members, and curious observers. Patricia took her seat at the bench and looked out at the courtroom. In a few minutes, she would call the first case. Somewhere in that room, or on his way to it, was Michael Rodriguez, the decorated war hero who had become a homeless veteran. Patricia had no idea what she would say when she saw him. She only knew that this would be one of the most important days of her career as a judge. Today, she would have the chance to honor a man who had once served his country with courage and distinction. The clock on the courtroom wall showed 9 o'clock exactly. Patricia picked up her gavel and prepared to call the court to order. Whatever happened next, she was ready to do her duty as a judge and as someone who remembered what real heroism looked like. Michael Rodriguez sat in the back row of the courtroom, holding his worn canvas bag on his lap. The bag contained everything he owned in the world, a change of clothes, his military medals, and a few personal items. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with the other people in the room. The courtroom was bigger than he expected. High ceilings, dark wood everywhere, and an American flag hanging behind the judge's bench. It reminded him of the military. Courtrooms he had seen during his service, but fancier. More intimidating. Other defendants sat near him, most looking as nervous as he felt. Some were young people in handcuffs, probably caught with drugs or stealing something. Others were older, like him, with the tired look of people who had been through the system many times before. Michael's public defender, a young woman named Lisa Martinez, had talked to him briefly in the hallway. She seemed nice enough, but overworked. She told him the charges were minor, and he would probably get time served or community service. Nothing to worry about, she had said, but Michael worried anyway. He had been arrested 6 days ago for sleeping in the doorway of a closed store. The police officer was just doing his job, Michael knew that, but it still felt wrong to be treated. Like a criminal for having nowhere else to go. In Afghanistan, he had slept in much worse places while defending his country. Now sleeping in the wrong place in that same country was a crime. The bailiff, a large man in a uniform, called the court to order. Everyone stood up as the judge entered. Michael looked up for the first time and saw a woman in black robes walking to the bench. She was older, maybe in her late 50s, with gray hair and a serious expression. "Judge Williams," the bailiff announced. She sat down and gestured for everyone else to sit. Michael settled back into his seat and looked down at his hands again. They were dirty and rough from living on the streets. Once those same hands had been clean and steady, handling weapons and leading soldiers. The first few cases were called. Traffic violations mostly. People paid their fines and left. Michael watched the process and tried to understand how things worked. The judge seemed fair, but firm. She listened to what people had to say, then made her decisions quickly. As the morning went on, Michael began to feel sleepy. He had not slept well in the abandoned building the night before. Street noises, police sirens, and his own nightmares had kept him awake. His eyelids felt heavy, but he forced himself to stay alert. Falling asleep in court would not help his case. Finally, the bailiff called his name. "Michael Anthony Rodriguez." Michael stood up slowly, his back stiff from the hard courtroom bench. He walked to the front of the room, his worn boots making soft sounds on the floor. Lisa Martinez joined him at the defendant's table. Judge Williams looked down at the papers in front of her. She began reading the charges in a clear, official voice. The defendant, Michael Anthony Rodriguez, is charged with trespassing and disturbing the peace. The incident occurred on October 15th at approximately 2:30 a.m. Michael listened as she read the details. Sleeping in a doorway on Collins Avenue, refusing to move when asked by store security, arguing with police officers when they arrived. It all sounded worse when read out loud in court, but it was accurate enough. Judge Williams continued reading from the file. The defendant is listed as unemployed, homeless, with a history of... She paused and looked more closely at the papers. Her voice slowed down. With a history of military service. Staff Sergeant Michael Anthony Rodriguez, United States Army, 3rd Infantry Division. Michael noticed the change in her voice, but kept looking down. He was used to people treating him differently when they learned he was a veteran. Sometimes they were more understanding. Sometimes they seemed disappointed that a former soldier had fallen so low. Judge Williams kept reading. 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan. Awarded the Purple Heart, Bronze Star, and Combat Infantry Badge. Her voice was getting quieter now, almost like she was reading to herself instead of to the courtroom. Michael looked up briefly and saw the judge staring at the papers with a strange expression. She seemed confused about something. Maybe she was surprised that a decorated veteran was standing in her courtroom on such minor charges. The judge set down the papers and looked directly at Michael for the first time. Her eyes were brown and serious, but there was something else in them, something that looked almost like recognition. Michael looked back down quickly. Eye contact with judges probably was not a good idea. Judge Williams picked up the papers again and read more carefully. Michael could see her lips moving slightly as she read to herself. The courtroom was quiet. Even Lisa Martinez seemed to sense that something unusual was happening. After what felt like a long time, Judge Williams spoke again. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, using his military rank. "Can you tell me what unit you served with in Afghanistan?" Michael was surprised by the question. It had nothing to do with his charges. But judges could ask whatever they wanted, so he answered. 3rd Infantry Division, Your Honor, 2nd Brigade Combat Team, 1st Battalion. The judge nodded, slowly. "And when did you serve there?" 3 tours, Your Honor. 2003, 2005, and 2007. Michael's voice was quiet but clear. These were facts he would never forget, even if he wanted to. Judge Williams was studying him now, her eyes moving over his face like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Michael felt uncomfortable under her gaze. He wondered if she thought he was lying about his service. Some people did not believe homeless veterans were really veterans. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," the judge said, "do you remember being involved in a court-martial proceeding in 2005? You were accused of leaving your post during combat." Michael's head snapped up. Very few people knew about that court-martial. It had happened more than 20 years ago, and the charges had been dropped. How did this judge know about it? "Yes, Your Honor," he said carefully. "But the charges were dismissed. I was trying to help wounded soldiers." Judge Williams nodded. "Yes, I know. You saved 3 men that day. You carried them to safety under enemy fire." Michael stared at her. How could she possibly know these details? The court-martial records were military documents, not something a civilian judge would normally see. Unless you were awarded the Bronze Star for your actions that day, Judge Williams continued. Her voice was softer now, almost gentle. "The citation said you showed exceptional courage and devotion to your fellow soldiers." Michael felt his heart beating faster. There was only one way this judge could know so much about what happened that day. She had to have been there. But who was she? He tried to remember the faces from the court-martial, but it was so long ago, and he had been young and scared. Judge Williams was looking at him with an expression he could not read. She seemed to be struggling with something, trying to decide what to say or do next. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. Suddenly, Judge Williams stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate, not like the quick, businesslike way she had handled the other cases. She was looking directly at Michael, and her eyes were bright with emotion. Michael did not understand what was happening. Judges did not usually stand up in the middle of reading charges. He looked at Lisa Martinez, but she seemed as confused as he was. Other people in the courtroom began to notice something was wrong. Conversation stopped. People turned to look at the judge, who was still standing behind her bench, staring down at Michael with an expression of recognition and respect. Michael felt something stirring in his chest, an emotion he had not felt in years. It was the feeling of being seen, really seen, not as a homeless man or a defendant, but as the soldier he had once been, as the man who had risked everything to save his friends. Judge Williams continued to stand in complete silence. The seconds stretched into a minute. The courtroom seemed frozen in time. Michael could hear his own breathing and the sound of his heart beating in his ears. He was beginning to understand that this moment was about more than his minor charges. This was about honor, about recognition, about a decorated veteran finally being seen for who he really was. After years of being invisible on the streets, Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez was being acknowledged in the most formal, respectful way possible. The silence continued, and Michael felt tears starting to form in his eyes. He had not cried in front of other people since Afghanistan, but he could not help it now. Someone remembered. Someone knew what he had done for his country. Someone cared. The silence in the courtroom grew longer and more powerful. Judge Williams remained standing, her eyes fixed on Michael Rodriguez with unmistakable respect. What had started as a routine hearing for minor charges had become something much more significant. Michael wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to maintain some dignity. He could not remember the last time someone had shown him this kind of respect. On the streets, people looked through him like he did not exist. Police officers saw him as a problem to be moved along. Social workers saw him as another case file. But this judge was seeing him as the soldier he had once been. In the gallery behind Michael, other people began to understand what was happening. An older man wearing a Vietnam veteran baseball cap slowly stood up. He recognized the moment for what it was, a tribute to a fellow veteran who had served with honor. The man's name was Robert Chen, and he was in court because his grandson had been caught speeding. When he saw Judge Williams standing in silence, honoring the homeless veteran at the defendant's table, something stirred in his own heart. He remembered coming home from Vietnam to protests and anger. He remembered being called names instead of being thanked for his service. Robert stood at attention, his back straight despite his 75 years. His movement caught the attention of the woman sitting next to him. She looked up at him, then at the judge, then at Michael. She did not understand everything that was happening, but she could feel the importance of the moment. The woman, Maria Santos, was there because her son was facing drug charges. She had been worried and scared all morning, but now she felt something different: respect, honor. She thought about her own father, who had served in World War II but never talked about it. Slowly, she stood up too. One by one, other people in the courtroom began to rise. A young lawyer who was waiting for his case to be called. A court reporter who had been working in the courthouse for 15 years. A police officer who was there to testify in another case. Each person who stood felt connected to something larger than themselves. The bailiff, Tom Rodriguez, no relation to Michael despite the shared name, had been working in courtrooms for 20 years. He had seen judges handle thousands of cases, but he had never seen anything like this. Judge Williams was still standing, still looking down at the defendant with obvious emotion. Tom understood military protocol. He had served in the Marines before becoming a bailiff. When he realized what Judge Williams was doing, paying tribute to a decorated veteran, he straightened to attention. His movement was crisp and professional, a Marine honoring a soldier. Lisa Martinez, Michael's public defender, felt confused at first. She was young, fresh out of law school, and had never experienced anything like this in a courtroom. But as she watched the people around her standing in respect, she began to understand. She rose from her chair, not sure if it was appropriate, but knowing it felt right. Even the prosecutor, David Kim, stood up. He had been ready to argue for a guilty plea and some jail time for Michael. It was a simple case: homeless man sleeping where he should not have been. But now he was seeing Michael Rodriguez not as just another defendant, but as a man who had earned the right to be treated with dignity. The silence continued for what felt like hours, but was really only 2 minutes. Judge Williams remained perfectly, still, her tribute unwavering. Michael could feel the weight of all those eyes on him, but for the first time in years, it did not make him want to hide. Instead, he felt a familiar sensation from his military days, the feeling of being part of something important. Memories flooded back to Michael as he stood there. He remembered the morning in Afghanistan when he had heard his fellow soldiers calling for help. The sound of gunfire all around them, the heat of the desert sun, the weight of his gear as he ran toward danger instead of away from it. He remembered carrying Private Johnson to safety first. The young man had been hit in the leg and could not walk. Michael had thrown Johnson over his shoulder and run back to the safe zone while bullets flew past them. Then he had gone back for Sergeant Williams, not related to the judge, just another Rodriguez coincidence. Williams had been hit in the chest and was losing blood fast. Michael had dragged him across 50 yards of open ground while enemy fighters shot at them from the hills. The third soldier, Corporal Davis, had been the hardest to save. He was trapped under a fallen wall and could barely move. Michael had to lift heavy concrete blocks while under fire, then carry Davis to safety. By the time he made it back with the third man, his own uniform was torn and bloody. Michael had never thought of himself as a hero for what he did that day. In his mind, he was just doing what any good soldier would do. You do not leave your friends behind. You do not let good men die if you can help it. It was that simple. But the Army had seen it differently. They had investigated the incident, interviewed witnesses, and decided that Michael's actions deserved recognition. The Bronze Star was a high honor, given only to soldiers who showed exceptional bravery in combat. The medal ceremony had been one of the proudest days of Michael's life. His unit had gathered in formation, and the commanding officer had read the citation out loud. Michael's chest had swelled with pride as the medal was pinned to his uniform. He had felt like he truly belonged, like he was making a difference in the world. Now, standing in this Miami courtroom 20 years later, Michael felt that same sense of belonging again. These people, strangers mostly, were standing to honor him not because of his current circumstances, but because of who he had been and what he had done for his country. Judge Williams finally spoke, breaking the long silence. Her voice was thick with emotion, but clear and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen of the court, please be seated." The authority in her voice was unmistakable, but so was the respect. As people sat back down, Judge Williams remained standing. She looked directly at Michael, and when she spoke again, her words carried throughout the silent courtroom. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," she said, "I want you to know that this court recognizes your service to our nation. Your actions in Afghanistan, particularly on the day you saved 3 fellow soldiers under enemy fire, represent the very best of American military values." Michael felt his knees go weak. He gripped the edge of the defendant's table to steady himself. This was not how he had expected this morning to go. He had come to court expecting to be sentenced for trespassing. Instead, he was being honored for service he had thought everyone had forgotten. Judge Williams continued, "What happened to you after your service, the struggles you have faced, the challenges of returning to civilian life, these do not diminish what you accomplished as a soldier. You are a hero, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, and this court wants to make sure you know that." The judge paused, looking around the courtroom at all the people who had stood in Michael's honor. "Sometimes we forget that the men and women who serve our country in faraway places come home and continue to fight battles here at home. Today, this courtroom wants to honor not just your military service, but your ongoing struggle to find your place in the civilian world." Michael could not hold back his tears anymore. They flowed down his cheeks as he listened to words he had needed to hear for so many years. Someone understood. Someone remembered. Someone cared about what happened to veterans after the wars ended. The moment was far from over, but already Michael felt something changing inside him. For the first time in years, he remembered who he used to be. Not just a homeless man with problems, but Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, decorated combat veteran, a man who had once been willing to die for his friends. Judge Williams slowly sat back down, but her eyes never left Michael Rodriguez. The courtroom remained unusually quiet, as if everyone understood they were witnessing something special. The formal business of the court seemed less important now than the human moment that was unfolding. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Judge Williams said, her voice now carrying both authority and warmth, "I need to tell you something. I was Lieutenant Patricia Williams, United States Army, Judge Advocate General's Corps. I was the prosecutor in your court-martial case in Afghanistan in 2005. Michael's eyes widened in shock. He stared at the judge, trying to see the young Army lieutenant in the older woman before him. Slowly, recognition dawned on his face. He remembered her now, the serious young officer who had investigated his case and ultimately recommended that all charges be dropped. "You defended me," Michael said quietly, his voice barely carrying across the courtroom. "You said I was a hero, not a deserter." Judge Williams nodded. "You were never a deserter, Staff Sergeant. You were a soldier who risked everything to save his fellow soldiers. I have never forgotten your courage that day, and I have never forgotten you." She opened the case file again and looked at the minor charges against him. Trespassing, disturbing the peace, such small offenses for a man who had once shown such great bravery. "These charges against you today," Judge Williams said, "they are dismissed, all of them. This court finds that Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez has already served his country with such distinction that no further punishment is warranted." A murmur of approval went through the courtroom. Lisa Martinez smiled with relief. She had expected to negotiate a plea deal, not to see all charges dropped completely, but Judge Williams was not finished. "However, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I cannot in good conscience let you walk out of this courtroom and back onto the streets. Not when I have the power to do something more." She reached for her phone and made a call right there from the bench. Michael watched in amazement as the judge spoke to someone about emergency housing for veterans. Her voice was firm and commanding, the voice of someone used to getting things done. "Yes, this is Judge Williams from the criminal court," she said into the phone. "I have a decorated combat veteran in my courtroom who needs immediate assistance. No, this cannot wait until tomorrow. I understand your procedures, but sometimes we need to make exceptions for exceptional people." Michael could not hear the other side of the conversation, but he could see that Judge Williams was not taking no for an answer. After several minutes, she hung up and looked back at him. "Staff Sergeant, there will be someone here in 30 minutes to take you to the Miami Veterans Affairs office. They have emergency housing available, and more importantly, they have counselors who specialize in helping combat veterans adjust to civilian life." Michael felt overwhelmed. In the span of 20 minutes, he had gone from facing jail time to having his charges dismissed and being offered real help. Your Honor, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Judge Williams replied. You earned this help 20 years ago when you saved those 3 soldiers. It's just taken this long for the system to catch up with what you deserve. She stood up again and addressed the entire courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to share something with you. This man, Michael Rodriguez, represents thousands of veterans who have served our country with honor and then struggled to find their place when they came home. Today, we have the opportunity to do right by one of them. Judge Williams looked directly at Michael again. Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that your story is not over. What happened to you after Afghanistan? The PTSD, the homelessness, the struggles. These are not failures. They are wounds of war, just as real as any physical injury. And like any wound, they can heal with the right treatment. Michael wiped his eyes again. He had been carrying shame about his homelessness for so long, thinking he was weak for not being able to handle civilian life. But Judge Williams was telling him it was not his fault. It was not a personal failure. It was a consequence of war. The bailiff approached the bench and whispered something to Judge Williams. She nodded and checked her watch. The VA representative will be here shortly, she announced. But before Staff Sergeant Rodriguez leaves this courtroom, I want to ask everyone here to do something. She gestured toward the gallery where people were still sitting in respectful silence. In this room today, we have witnessed something important. We have seen a homeless veteran recognized not for his current circumstances, but for his service and sacrifice. I want each of you to remember this moment. Judge Williams paused, choosing her words carefully. There are thousands of veterans in our community who need our help. Some are homeless like Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was. Others are struggling with invisible wounds that make it hard for them to work or maintain relationships. They all deserve our respect and support. An older man in the gallery raised his hand. It was Robert Chen, the Vietnam veteran who had been among the first to stand. Your Honor, what can we do to help? Judge Williams smiled. There are many organizations in Miami that help veterans. They need volunteers, donations, and most importantly, they need people who understand that veterans are not problems to be solved, but heroes who deserve our ongoing gratitude. She turned back to Michael. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I want you to promise me something. When you get back on your feet, and you will get back on your feet, I want you to help other veterans who are still struggling. Your experience on the streets combined with your military leadership skills makes you uniquely qualified to reach people that others cannot. Michael straightened his shoulders slightly. For the first time in years, someone was asking him to be a leader again. I promise, Your Honor, if I can help even one veteran avoid what I went through, it will be worth it. The courtroom door opened, and a woman in a VA uniform entered. She looked around until she saw Judge Williams, who waved her forward. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Judge Williams said, this is Sarah Martinez from the Veterans Affairs Office. She's going to help you get started on your journey back. Sarah Martinez approached Michael with a warm smile. It's an honor to meet you, Staff Sergeant. I've already spoken to our housing coordinator and our PTSD counselor. We're going to take good care of you. As Michael gathered his few belongings, Judge Williams called him back to the bench one more time. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. This is my direct number, she said quietly. If you ever need anything at all, you call me. That's not just as a judge to a defendant. That's as one veteran to another. Michael took the card with shaking hands. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for caring. Judge Williams nodded. Thank you for your service, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, both to your country and to your fellow soldiers. You are not forgotten. As Michael walked toward the courtroom door with Sarah Martinez, people began to applaud. It started with Robert Chen and spread throughout the room. Michael turned back once to see Judge Williams watching him with obvious pride. 6 months later, Michael Rodriguez was a different man. The VA had provided him with housing, medical care, and counseling for his PTSD. More importantly, they had given him a job working with other homeless veterans on the streets of Miami. Michael's experience made him uniquely effective at reaching veterans who had given up hope. He knew their struggles because he had lived them. He knew their shame because he had felt it. And he knew their potential for recovery because he was living proof that it was possible. Judge Williams kept track of Michael's progress through the VA social worker. She learned that he had reunited with his ex-wife, Maria, not as husband and wife, but as friends who could finally understand each other. She learned that he was speaking at schools and community groups about veteran issues. Most importantly, she learned that he had helped 17 other homeless veterans get connected with services and housing. Each one was a life saved, a story rewritten, a hero reclaimed. 1 year after that day in court, Michael Rodriguez returned to Judge Williams's courtroom. But this time, he was not a defendant. He was there as a witness in support of another homeless veteran who was facing charges. When Judge Williams saw him walk through the door in clean clothes, with clear eyes and confident posture, she had to fight back tears. This was what justice really looked like. Not just punishment for wrongdoing, but recognition of human dignity and the power of second chances. After the hearing, Michael approached the bench. Your Honor, I wanted to thank you again for what you did for me. But more than that, I wanted you to know that you saved more than just one life that day. Every veteran I've been able to help, that's partly because of you. Judge Williams smiled. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you saved those lives yourself. You just needed someone to remind you who you really were. As Michael left the courtroom that day, Judge Williams reflected on her 20-year career as a judge. She had handled thousands of cases, made countless decisions, and tried always to be fair and impartial. But she knew that the day she stood in silence to honor a homeless veteran would be remembered as the most important moment of her time on the bench. Sometimes justice is about punishment.